I don't know what happened. I just suck at that stuff. It's like a whack-a-mole, a spiritual whack-a-mole with everything I do. I'm a musician, so I like gear, you know, software. Oh my God, I keep buying all the software. Reverb is a dangerous thing. I had to freaking erase that damn thing because I kept on finding all these great deals on shit that I don't need, you know? It's just never ending. That's why there's guys with long-term sobriety, because there's always something to work on. No matter what, I got to work on my head. You know, I conditioned my body and my spirit for all those years that I used for instant gratification. Whenever I would get high, boom, it was like that. I just did it. Whether I pounded in my arm, pounded in my nose, whatever. It was like that. Everything was like that. And then I would check out and it was off to the races, you know? Life doesn't work like that. Just because I tell my kids that I love them, it doesn't automatically fix the damage that I've done. You know? It's always a work in progress, and it doesn't have to be perfect. That's a whole other character defect, trying to be perfect for things to go right, you know? Man, that's just such a pain in the ass. But yeah, I did a lot of stuff like that, just alcoholically. It was just dumb. And I still do it. That's why there's a step 10, man. You got to do the continuous sobriety. When you're wrong, promptly admit it, you know, promptly make amends. Amends does not mean apologies. Oh, man, I learned that early. I remember the first times when I was first getting sober in the 90s, in the 1900s, I went and I tried to make amends with my parents. I tried to tell them, Mom, Dad, Mommy, Papi, you know, I just want you to know I've been drinking a lot. I started doing drugs. It was crazy. And my mom's like, you do drugs? What kind of drugs? I thought you just drank. Oh, all sorts of shit, you know? And I went down the list and I was making her cry. She didn't know I was doing all this other stuff. She just knew that I was always, you know, inebriated. But I made them cry. And on top of that, after that, I would tell my dad, well, you know, it's all because of you, you know? And it's like, and he goes, my dad's like, what are you talking about, mijo? Well, what did I do? It's like, well, you have alcohol all over the place. And you would drink, you know? And just some lame shit like that. Jesus Christ. I just really was making a wreckage. And that was not sponsored directed. I just sponsored myself. I read it in a book kind of once over. I looked at the 9th step without doing any other ones before that. And I just went and did that shit. And I just made a mess, man. But that's what I do all the time as an alcoholic. I sponsor other guys, a few guys. And I try to remind everybody and remind myself that it's constant course correction. You know, and God is like the autopilot of the plane. I sat one time with an airplane pilot. You know, I was in a flight to Australia, and he had these really cool night vision goggles in his bag. It was bananas. This is in the 90s, and he said, you know, the pilot, because I saw the pilot walk by me. He said, wow, he's not flying the plane. He goes, well, it's always on. He's got a co-pilot, and it's always an automatic pilot. These big planes, when you're up 35,000 feet in the air, planes kind of, there's so much calculation and course correction that you have to leave it because it's, you know, it takes a computer to just keep that up, or else you just wear out the pilot, you know? And I didn't know that. It's like, so you're telling me this guy just puts his hands, the life of all of us in this computer's hands? Yeah, do it every day. Nobody crashes. And, you know, and that's kind of what it's like with God. It's like when they tell you to hand it over, that's really what it means. It's just all it really means. It's really simple. You just don't have that kind of control over the final outcome of things, you know? And it took a lot for me to learn that. When I first got sober, right around the same time that the IRS came knocking, I had a really half-measured sobriety. And my sister died of this disease. And let me tell you how she died of this disease. My understanding with the doctors was that she got into a car accident and she decided to leave against doctor's orders because she had a hard time breathing. So the doctor said, you have to go home with an oxygen tank. But since you're leaving on your own, you know, the insurance doesn't cover. So it's either that or you take these pills for $20 and it costs like $100 a day to have the oxygen tank. Mm-hmm. So she chose the pills because that's what she was used to when she got home. And that's why she wanted to go home, because she had a bunch of pills that she would take. So she went home that day, took those pills that the doctor gave her, and then took all the other pills that she usually would take. And then she didn't wake up the next day. That was my sister. My brother died of this stuff, directly and indirectly because of this stuff. Well, when they found him a couple blocks away from my house, he was all shut up with bullet holes all over his body because he was in a bad way in LA back in the day. And they found him with a bunch of counterfeit bills and some crack vials. My grandfather was such an alcoholic that he had an alcoholic stroke, and he was a vocalist. He was a singer in Mexico. So that was the only way he could make money. But he couldn't enunciate words anymore. So he ended up in the streets eventually. And every once in a while he would come home and write music, and he couldn't trust himself. So he would put all the music in my grandmother's name so that she would get whatever money or checks would come after. So alcoholism runs deep in my family. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know if it's because of my blood or something. I just know that I'm familiar with it. I know that it's there, and it's lightning has struck close in my family several times. So I got to keep an eye on it, and I got to keep my stuff together because I have 2 children. You know, the way I behave in sobriety has a lot to do with how, like, if that day ever comes with my kids and they have to deal with this stuff, they have to deal that I'm the example. So the better I do my program, the better chance they have for this kind of example. You know, so I got to keep that up. You know, sometimes you got to keep it up with the whole toxicity thing. Now that's been coming up a lot for me in relationships. People pleasing is my sponsor told me that people pleasing is going to kill me someday, and I just thought that sounded kind of whack. I didn't really understand that, but I get it now. Again, I had to get on my knees about that stuff. People pleasing is basically just telling people to placate them or just let them hear what they want so they get off your back. It's lying. It's basically lying, and it's a deadly sin, you know. And if you do that with relationships, close relationships, you think it's harmless, but it's one of those slow things that slow and easy really kills you, you know. And I'm learning a lot about that. Even with my ex-wife, the damage that I've done by people pleasing really did a number on her, you know. But man, well, yeah, it could be kind of jacked up, but you know, I'm just trying to make better decisions. My alcoholism looks like this. You know, if I get into a fender bender in the street, I get out of my car, I'm pissed, I get a sledgehammer and I beat the car. You know, I make it worse, you know. If it's raining and everything's all clogged up in the house, or if one time the pipes got busted in my house, And I was so stressed out. I thought it was the end of the world. All my electronic stuff, my work, my computer, my gear was getting wet, and I just got pissed and I walked out and I just let everything get wet, And eventually I did the right thing by calling my sponsor. It says, man, everything's wet in the house, everything's jacked up. And my sponsor says, dude, what the F is wrong with you? Go do something about it, It's like, what do you expect? God is just going to come down and magically save you? God isn't Santa Claus, I treated God, my higher power, as Santa Claus for the longest time. I thought if I was good, I would get something cool at the end, That's not how things work. Not for me. My God, my higher power is cool, man. He's just like that cool old veterano cholo that hangs out. It's like, let's say he's Danny Trejo, okay? Let's say my God looks just like Danny Trejo, okay? I go up to him and I got to be honest with him because he's a tough guy and he can see right through you when you're lying. That's my God, all right? I'll say, all right, God, I'm going to hand this over to you and I'm just going to do what I need to do and put it in your hands. Now, God, I'm lying. I don't really mean it. I don't really want to do it. I just want to crawl in bed and just go to bed. Or I just want to, put everything on fire. But I'm going to try my best. I'm going to do my best to hand it over to you. And my God's like, all right, cool, man. That's cool. That's it. You're do your thing, mijo. I got you. So when I have sponsees, I let them borrow my God, says if they say, well, I was Catholic or I was this and this and that, and I don't really believe in God. Well, that's not what I'm asking you to do. That's what nobody's asking you. You just got to build your own God. As long as your higher power is stronger than your disease, your alcoholism, you're cool. As long as it's not a person, as long as it's not your girlfriend, yeah, man. But honestly, I'm enjoying being sober for so long because I love seeing people recover. I love seeing people go through all the rough spots in their lives, and I'm still going through it. There's not much difference between me and a new guy when it comes to trying to survive this thing. The only difference is I know what I need to do. I've experienced it. I went through it. I don't wander off too far from the herd, I have the gift of seeing people recover. I have also seen people fall, and it breaks my heart. Not a young folk nowadays, or a lot of old folk, man. People with a lot of time fall off because they think they know what they're talking about after all these years. I like sticking around with people that actually do the work. Because I want to live really well. I want to be able to pay my rent. I would like to pay a mortgage sometime. I would like to be able to have, some money saved in the bank, like normal people do, whatever that is. But, I was talking to a friend of mine that is normie, right? And she was talking about this thing called tithing. So that because she has a certain amount of wealth and she's okay. So she does this thing. We went to go eat and she paid. It was like right on, and and she paid this tithing on top of that because she had this money, and she says that 20% of whatever she comes or whatever God provides, she gives it away, 20% of it. So she did that. We went to go eat. She paid, and she gave it was like a $30 meal, and she gave like a $50 tip. And this guy was so freaking happy. He came, gave us cookies, and she just does this because, that's what you do. You just give it away. You just keep it going and I asked why. And she goes, because it all comes from God. It all comes from my higher power. And she says, I'm not a really religious person. I don't really go to church every day. It's not about that. It's just, I know there's something out there and I got my own interpretation about it. And I'm like, damn, you do this and you're not an addict? That's pretty cool. So she doesn't worry about the same things. And Point is that this normal person that is, or this person that is not an alcoholic that needs the extra help from this book, already has this kind of right sizedness in her that keeps her going, you know? And that was a great example for me because I have to explain or I have to help my sponsees figure out for themselves how to find a higher power, you know, how to find a God. Because believe it or not, this is a spiritual program. You got to believe in something that is stronger than your addiction, that is not a person. You can't be Deepak Chopra. You can't be, you know, Tony Robbins with the big old banana hands. You know, and that was a funny thing too. Early on in my early sobriety, I used to hang out with all these wealthy people, and they would tell me, "Oh, I went and met this guru, and if you have problems with drinking, I went and took it away." I was like, "Oh, really? That's cool." So I went to go see him, and this guy comes in. I go to this house right up in the hills and Holmby Hills. It's like Holmby Hills makes Beverly Hills look like, you know, like East LA. So anyway, so I go to this house, this big ass thing, and I walk in through the kiosk, and it says, "Oh, forgot his name, but homie's over there." And I walked into the room, and it was like this waterfall, and there's birds and shit. And then I walk in, and this guy just comes up. He's all dressed in white, and he's from India. And he walks in, and he's all like, "Hey, how are you? What can I do for you?" He's like, "Well, I'm pissed at this guy. I hate this. I drink too much. I spend all my money. What do I do, man?" And you know what the guy told me? He goes, "Well, I hear what you're saying, but you ever try Alcoholics Anonymous?" I was so mad that he said that shit, you know? It's like, really? You're telling me to try Alcoholics Anonymous? So I got sick of him and I left. And you know, and then I went to another guy, you know, I went to Deepak Chopra, and he had this other guy that was like his second in command. And I explained all my troubles to him. And the guy, the same Vato tells me, "Hey, you know, you should try Alcoholics Anonymous for your kind of stuff." You're going to, man, I paid you all this money to tell me same thing. It just kept on going back to that, you know. It's so simple. It's so simple to like take care of this stuff. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it's super simple. You know, it's such a simple program about what to do. Like, have sponsees always tell me, just call me every day. Call me every day at 2:00. All right. If you could do that 90 days straight, boom, you're good. We'll go on to the next level. We'll talk all the way through, and we'll just kind of gauge where you need to go in steps. All right. So 2:00, after a while, he calls at 2:05, 2:30, then it's 3:30, and then every other day, and then every other week. And then next thing you know, something terrible happens and he falls apart. And he comes back to me and he goes, "The only reason I'm showing you how to do this for yourself is so you could have some self-esteem again." Because the one thing that I lost when I first got sober, I was just somebody you could not count on. You couldn't leave I was not the guy that you would leave your car with or your kids, you know, alone for too long. You couldn't leave things alone because something would happen because I was not paying attention. I was always money, you know. I was just not that kind of guy that you could count on. And the worst part about it is that I accepted that. I believed it, and the self-hate really seeped in. And the only way I could get through it is by doing these little things and exercising self-esteem. Just calling my sponsor every day at 8:20 a.m. I had to call mine. And just to do that much every day consistently, I just had to learn how to be consistent with my word. I had to build back up what my word means. And I have to believe it in order to do it. And just doing that helps all my guys. It helped me. That's how I got sober. I just had a little flashback about how unreliable I was. And The point is now to be of service to people is what really helps me. I have to sponsor other guys. I have to be a secretary to meetings. I have to help people with reading. I am someone that's of service. I am not in charge. I don't represent, my program. I don't represent the people in recovery. I don't represent anybody. I am just another worker amongst workers. I have an ego problem. If I, to be more precise, I have a false pride problem. There's nothing wrong with having enough pride to like bathe and brush your teeth. That's important. That's the good kind of pride. The bad kind of pride is when you start thinking you're better than everybody else, or that you don't need something that, like somebody's love or somebody's, I don't know, just how it was in day zero. Fear was my higher power. Every decision I made was based on the kind of fear I had at the time, at the moment. So every time I would worry or I would bitch and complain about whatever I was in fear about, be it money, be it death, be it some sort of illness or disease, I would just keep worrying about it and keep trying to obsessively try to figure out something, and that big fear was a God-sized hole, and I was filling it with fear, and God is bigger than fear. So there was not enough fear in the world that I could throw into something that I would feel better until I was done, But that's the best way to explain to people I help through the steps about what fear looks like for me, because obviously the presence of fear is usually because of the absence of your higher power, the absence of God. And that was always a big one for me, because I didn't know that I was doing that. I didn't know that fear was my God. I didn't know that every decision that I made was based on fear until I really sat down and wrote it out and thought about it and had really good conversations about it. Fear was my higher power. Fear was my God. I would wake up with it. I would go to bed with it. I would make every decision based on it. Every feeling and every vibe that everybody in my family would feel, they would feel it too. So now that I substitute that fear with my higher power, my God that looks a little bit like Danny Trejo, Machete, it's a little funnier, man. It's a little humorous. It's a little cooler, but it's real and it's loving. And I don't have a punishing God. God don't need to punish me. He's got bigger things to do. He's like, either you're in or you're out, Like, I'm in the light that is out there. I have to stay in God's light, in my higher power's light. If I start going in darkness with whatever, how they say you're only sick as your secrets, all those little sayings that everybody says. If I get away from the light, that's me doing that. It's nobody else. It's just me. So I try to stay in the herd, when there's meetings, when there's my sponsor, when there's all my sponsee brothers and all the sponsees, the men that I help. If I stay in the herd, we all know what happens in all those safaris when you see the little water buffalo wander too far from the herd, gets eaten, and I'm doing my best to not be that dummy that steps out, because that's I mean, that's all it is. That's my design for living. I am a service. call my sponsor every day. If I don't have resentment, then I have gratitude. And I give my sponsor gratitude. You know, I tell my sponsor I'm grateful for the top three things. You know, I'm grateful for my sobriety because I'm able to see clearly now, make better decisions with my life. I'm able to, I still have a roof over my head. I still have my kids living with me, which is pretty rad. You know, they're in their 20s and they live with me. Yeah, I got kids in in their 20s. I don't look that old. Maybe I do. I don't know. I'm grateful for the fact that I do music for a living. That's pretty awesome. It doesn't always pay all the bills, but I'd rather be bummed out doing something I love doing, than working some job where I'm just miserable. I'm blessed with that. And it's only as good as the work I put into it, the real honest work, the real right size thing. I'm grateful. I look at, and for me, I look at making music for people when I perform. That's an ultimate way of being of service, because I provide a bit of relief, a bit of breath for people, I mean, that's important. Every time it is a service. Otherwise, I'm just up on stage, trying to look at myself in the mirror or something. That's annoying, I do my best to be the best person I can be, be the best version of myself that I could be, to admit my faults quickly and to be firm about my boundaries so that I don't have toxicity in my life. That's one thing you notice too, man. Like when you get sober and you really start working this program and you stay in recovery, you start attracting something that you are. Never mind the toxicity of people when they're in using or something, but you start becoming somebody that can attract, like-minded people, or people that won't screw you up, people that won't stab you in the back spiritually, you surround yourself with just peace, and that's all I really want now, man. I want peace. I want love. I want to be I just want to be okay, yeah, man. So I hope that I help people as much as I could when it comes to this kind of stuff, because I mean, I know there's people out there, and it's a trip how meetings and stuff turn into this whole thing with the Zoom rooms and all that. But I hope I'm able to, I said something that helps somebody, because I don't remember who said what in my early sobriety. I just remember how I felt when they said it. I remember how I felt when I was able to relate to whoever was speaking, and I hope I give something positive. I pray that I do. I meditated and prayed earlier before this, and I hope that whatever grace that came on me, that it'll splash on all you people's faces. I don't know if that sounds right, but yeah, man. Just I don't know, man. Hey, Casey, I think I'm good. If there's anything else I need to say.
Yeah, that sounds good. So there's a couple of questions for you. Thank you, Esdru. Got a couple of questions. So was there a time that your sobriety on the road ever became thin and you came your closest to a drink or a drug?
Between 95 and 2009, it was all a bad idea. The reason I fell off every time was because I was always a dry drunk. So they say whenever you take your first drink again, when you relapse, you decided to do it a long time before, because I always had such a half-assed, half-measured program. I never really did the program, and I was never really done. So when I was finally done, I was done. I gave up. I was like, I'm good now. But it took a long time for me to get to that point. It took from 1995 to 2009 in March to finally get down on my knees about it. There was a lot of pain. And that's really what did it for me to actually decide not to. So, I mean, I work in bars. I work with people, everybody getting loaded and high and everything. It's what I do for a living, but what I do for a living doesn't really, I don't need to get loaded. That's just your alcoholic mind telling you something in the back, But that was my experience with it. Hope that helps.
When did you take your first drink or drug?
Oh, geez. I think I was like 7, I think. My dad had a beer, and it was a Budweiser, Mexican champagne. And I remember he was drinking it. I was like, well, he keeps drinking it. I wonder what it's like. And I drank it, and I was like, whoa, it just tasted awful. But then I put it back. It was always a mistake, Dad. And then when they would have parties or something, after that, I got kind of hooked. It just got in my brain. It's like, ooh, I feel all warm and tingly. And then I started getting with the hard liquor later on, like within that year. They would have parties, walk around. I would just pour some stuff real quick and then go in my room and drink it. That must have been about somewhere between 5 and 7. Won't tell my mom.
So we know that there can be genetic links to addiction. Was there a recovery in your family? Are you the first in your family to go through the recovery process?
Yes. I think I had an uncle that went through it, and then he found God. But who am I to judge? Some people use God, and that's cool. But he never did I prefer doing the thoroughness of the program about being all right spiritually and mentally and emotional sobriety. Doing the best decisions you can, but the more power to my uncle who went that way, He just used God a lot. That was good for him.
Another question. Who's been the most influential in your sobriety journey?
My sponsor. My sponsor has like 30 years in the program in sobriety, continuous sobriety. He sponsors like, I don't know, like 20, 30 dudes. And I didn't know who he was before I got sober, but I hear all these stories. One time he accepted a cake, and some lady left town and came back like 10 years later. And when she shared, she said, "You are that guy? I remember you have children and a wife? That's incredible." It was blowing her mind away that this guy got sober. So that says a lot, what he was like before and what he's like today. You would never know. You would never know. Yeah, but my sponsor. Yeah.
Another question. Did your music creativity change when you began your sobriety journey?
Yes, I was more organized, and I started remembering everything I'd write. I know there's a thing that they say with musicians that, once you get sober, your music gets boring. I don't know, man. I don't know about that. I always wondered what it'd be like if Jimi Hendrix was still alive today, and what if for example, it is common knowledge that David Bowie, who was one of my favorite artists in music, just was sober, and he did this program, and the music, his last album was amazing. I get chills every time I still hear it. So I know, I'm not here to blow people up in their own sobriety, but there are plenty of people out there that are clean and sober and are in recovery, and they do really well after they got sober. But yeah, I remember stuff more. I'm a lot more organized. I get hired all the time for filming, TV, composing. I kind of grew up, So I kind of moved to this next level where I'm able to. I like being home. Being on the road was rough. I don't like it. You know, it kind of sucks. But I like who I am now, where I am with music. I'm more creative. I'm more aware, more organized, and I'm more reliable, which is pretty cool.
So has your recovery branched out into other 12-step groups? I know there's 70 or 80 different 12-step groups. Are there any more?
Al-Anon. Al-Anon's a big one. Chances are, if you're an alcoholic, you know somebody that's struggling with either the sobriety or they're using or messing you up. Al-Anon came in very handy for most of my life. I still go to meetings about it. I still, my sponsor's a double winner, so we switch back and forth, you know, with all of that. So Al-Anon's a big one. Al-Anon's a very good one. I love it. I learned how to mind my own business. I learned I can't control anybody, and I'm not a doormat, you know, which is the whole people-pleasing thing. I really worked it out when it came to other people, because I was addicted to other alcoholics. Addicted to the fact that I think I could control their outcome or something. It's bananas. Or that I had a cape. I don't own a cape, that I could save them or change them, which is also playing God, you know. And I'm not good at playing God. I suck at it.
If you could go back to your 7-year-old self when you first picked up your drink, what would you say to that young Asdru Sierra?
I got something else for you. Here, there's other ways to, I don't know, man, because you know what's funny about using is that it worked until it didn't work anymore. You know, it helped me get out of my shell. It helped me numb a lot of really bad things that happened to me in my life. And then it quickly turned. I just wish if anybody came up to me, would be a better way to deal with my insecurity. You know, a better way to deal with pain. You know, my parents may not have been really good at it, but they knew how to love me. But I just didn't know how to deal with all the stuff that made me keep drinking. So I would hope that somebody, if anything like that happened, I would hope they would find a way to learn some skills on how to feel better. Does that help?
Asdru Sierra, thank you so much for your time, and be well. We'll see you again soon. For those of you watching at home, stick around. We'll be back in about 7 minutes. Hello and welcome back. My name is Casey King, and this is the Addiction and Recovery Lecture Series. Our last speaker for the year is Sid Bullins. Sid is an American singer-songwriter who's best known for serving as backup vocalist on tours and albums with Elton John and Rod Stewart, as well as providing vocals on the soundtrack of the 1978 feature film, Grease. There was even an appearance on Dick Clark's American Bandstand. In 2020, his ninth album, Walking Through the World, was released 42 years after her debut. Sid comes to us from Nashville, Tennessee. Please welcome Sid Bullins.
Hey everybody, my name's Sid and I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict, and I'm happy to be with you here tonight. Forgive the dings. I can't seem to turn off my messages. I've tried, but anyway, I am so happy to be here tonight with everybody at here tonight, and I'm sorry, I just got distracted for a second. At Horry-Georgetown. I am an alcoholic and a drug addict, and I loved hearing Asdru speak before me. He said some wonderful things, and I might touch on a couple when I get going with my story. So my sobriety date is November 13th, 1976, and I was just looking at, I have the 12-step app on my phone, and that's 16,540 days. One day at a time. I got sober young, and I'll go back. I had a very short drunkalogue. I was, well, let me start. Let me say one thing in the beginning here. So you have a context from which we can go. First of all, my name is Sid Bullins, but it used to be Cindy. I am a transgendered female to male. I'm a male, trans man now. I transitioned about 10 years ago. At a late age, at an old age, and I'll get into that a little bit more later. But just so you know, so my story, my life, most of my life, is as a woman, as a female. And I grew up in Massachusetts to one of a family of 5 kids. My parents were both alcoholic in my mind. They never declared themselves such, but it was a chaotic household. I was the middle of 5 children, and seemed to be kind of the favorite child and the scapegoat at the same time. And I had a lot of energy as a kid, and I hated alcohol. Hated it. Never wanted to drink. Never wanted to be like my parents. From a very early age, it created a lot of chaos in our house. And I didn't want to be a part of that. I didn't want to be like my mother who drank to excess and just caused a lot of havoc in our household. My father drank as well. He was a World War II veteran. He was wounded critically in the war and was in pain almost all the time, and was silent about it, as most people were. I'm sorry, I'm getting very annoyed with my text, and I can't seem to do something about it, and I apologize, Casey. And I just wanted to be a regular kid, and I wasn't. I wasn't for a lot of reasons. I wasn't because I never felt like a girl. I wasn't because my parents drank, and there was always chaos in the house. I didn't feel normal. I didn't feel right within myself. I didn't feel safe in my family. Um, and from the very beginning, I just knew that I was different. And that got confirmed a lot by outside forces, by my mother, by teachers, by other adults in my life. Uh, so I ran away from home very early. The first time was 6 years old, and I continued from there. I ran away for real when I was 15 years old. I went from my small town in Massachusetts where I was living, farm town north of Boston, to New York City. I wanted to find my fame and fortune as a musician. And I got caught by the New York City police, the FBI, and my mother about 2 weeks later and taken home. But that was kind of the beginning of my need to get out of any bad situation and to become what we call in recovery someone who does a lot of geographics. I just had to keep moving. Had to keep leaving whatever space I was in if it became uncomfortable. As I said, I hated alcohol. So at 14, I started. My first drug was. I think the first thing I ever did was hashish. And as you know by my sobriety date, I'm older. I was born in the 50s, grew up in the 60s, and everything was drugs at that time. Even though my friends drank in high school, I didn't. But I did smoke marijuana. Even though my first thing was hashish, it was just happened to be that. Some friend had it somewhere. And so I started to smoke marijuana, and I experimented with some pills, and I did a little bit of LSD and mescaline, but I didn't get addicted right away. It didn't become a need for me in terms of every day, all the time. Uh, you know, I have to get out of my head. I got out of my head more by writing songs, by playing my guitar. I started, you know, playing little gigs when I was 15, 16 years old around town and around Massachusetts. I used to hitchhike to Boston and hang out at some of the famous clubs in the late 60s and early 70s and um, and go to the jam nights and the open mics and so on and so forth. So music actually saved me a little bit in the beginning until it turned from getting into drugs and alcohol right away. It wasn't until I moved to Los Angeles. Um, Out of high school, I went to New York City for a year or so, and then I went to LA to find my fame and fortune. And when I got to LA, I got after I worked in a gas station, hitchhiked around, slept on people's couches, was homeless for a very short time, meaning that I was sleeping on people's couches and didn't know where I was going to be one night to the next. I was never literally on the street, but I got really close. And that went on for a few months until I met a very famous record producer just by chance and a songwriter. And he took me in, and I became his gopher protege, I call it. And he was an alcoholic, and he drank all the time, morning, noon, and night. And I became his caretaker of sorts. Living in a penthouse in Hollywood, I drove his car. I picked up his drugs for him in strange places. I went to liquor stores and bought his alcohol. And in exchange, he taught me about the music business, and I met a lot of famous people. But his alcoholism was so bad that well, let me go back. I really didn't have a desire to pick up alcohol as a drug of choice. I still smoked a little grass and weed and whatever you want to call it back then, marijuana. But what happened to me first, before the alcohol became an addiction for me, was that there was a lot of cocaine in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, in the music business in the mid-70s. And I moved out to LA in 1973, and by 1974, I was close to being a full-bore cocaine addict. And that really propelled me into drinking alcohol, because I didn't want to drink alcohol. I didn't want to be like my mother. I didn't want to be even like my father, who was more of a silent drunk with a few rages here and there. But my mother was just this obnoxious drunk who it was embarrassing to be around. Couldn't have friends at home, couldn't bring friends home because we never knew what my mother was going to be like. And I didn't want to be that. You know, it was hard enough being a woman, being a girl in those days. I didn't want to be a drunken woman. And this was all in my mind, of course, my images. So I did get into cocaine, and it became my drug of choice. My drunkalogue is really about 2.5 years, because I got sober in 1976. So in 1974 was when I started really becoming an addict. And then through that time, I started having things happen to me in the music business, which were really my dreams come true. Casey mentioned that I sang with Elton John. Yeah, I sang with Elton John for almost 2 years, 1.5 years in 1975 and 76. I was on the road with him. I did some sessions with Rod Stewart. I sang with Bob Dylan. In fact, I was supposed to go on the road with Bob Dylan and had to choose between Bob Dylan and Elton John in one day. And that's another story for another time, not for what we're talking about tonight. But I had all these things happening to me that were good, that were incredibly good. And yet I had so little self-esteem and so little knowledge of how to live my life. I didn't destroy those opportunities when they came. I did do those things, but I didn't know how to handle it at the time. So I started drinking along with everybody else. You go on the road with some of those famous people, or you're in the studio with famous people, and not just famous people, normal people. If you're in the music business, especially in the mid-70s, there was everything around. It was very accessible. And I started drinking and never ever knew that or thought in my mind that I was becoming addicted to alcohol, because I knew what that looked like from my family, from other people who I knew, from the person I was living with at the time, not as a relationship, but who I was, he was my mentor. I knew what alcoholism did to people. I didn't think it was doing it to me. I thought I was mitigating the effects of all the cocaine I was doing. And I only drank wine or beer occasionally. Once in a blue moon, I'd have a margarita or something. But literally, I have never in my life, to this day, well, I've been sober 45 years, but I've never in my life had a martini. I've never had a whiskey sour. I've never had, all those drinks that people talk about, Manhattans and, the fancy stuff, even the non-fancy stuff. Yeah, I had some screwdrivers and a couple of margaritas, but really, I drank wine, and that was the alcohol of choice, red wine. But I drank enough of it. I drank a lot of it, toward the end. So my drunkalog is short. Thank God, because I would be dead if it wasn't. Because what happened as time went on within those 2 years, I was already addicted to snorting cocaine. I started to use alcohol, and I use that term, use alcohol, to balance out how much cocaine I was using. I stopped smoking grass, smoking weed, when I went on the road with Elton John. And when that was in September of 75. I didn't want to do it. It made me paranoid. So that was out of the picture. So it was really cocaine and wine. And but what happened, eventually I was at a friend's home purely for the cocaine. And because what do? When you're addicted to drugs and you become a drug addict, you hang out with people who either have it or can get it or will buy it or, whatever. You want to be with those people because that's what you want. And I would do some stuff alone, but not really. I didn't want to. What was the point? I wanted to have fun. And one day I was at a friend's house, and she came out of the bath. We had some margaritas. That was one time when I did have some hard alcohol. And she got up off the couch in her house, and she said to me, "I'm going into the bathroom, and I'm going to shoot up some cocaine. Do you want to do it?" And I looked at her. I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned. I thought, I just didn't even know what to say, because it never occurred to me that I would ever do such a thing, put a needle in my arm. And I don't even know if I said no. I didn't say yes at that moment. And she went and did it and came back out, and she said, "Are you sure you don't want to do it?" And this is what the alcohol did for me. Because I had been drinking, and because, I wasn't falling down drunk, but I was high, I was loaded, whatever you want to call it. I looked at her and I said, "What the fuck?" And I went into the bathroom, and she did it and put a needle in my arm of cocaine. And that was the beginning of a 2.5 month, 3-month slide for me that nearly killed me. And only by the grace of God did I come out of that alive. And here's why I came out of it alive. Because a few months before, the producer, Bob, who I was living with at the time, had really hit his bottom and started going to recovery. And so I started to go to recovery rooms, to the program with Bob, to be supportive of him. And so I met people who were in recovery, in 12-step recovery. I wasn't. I was just along for the ride. I was just supporting my mentor who was, I was living in his penthouse, and I, as like I said, as gopher protege. But I had met some people who, well, let's put it this way. The minute I walked into the minute I walked into the recovery rooms, I wanted what you had. I wanted what they had. They were laughing. They were telling the truth about themselves. Stories, I couldn't even believe the stories I was hearing. Oh my God, people who had these incredibly eventful lives, who had done these horrendous things, or who had horrendous things happen to them, and they were here talking about it honestly, openly. People were laughing. People were crying at times because of the profundity of some of the things they were saying and what happened when they got sober, the miracles that were happening. I had never heard such a thing. I had never experienced such a thing. Now, I was only in my mid-20s by that time, 24. And I I I I want I didn't know I wanted it, but I knew there was this feeling of safety there that I had never had in my life. It makes me well up to think about it. So I started attending these meetings with Bob, and before I started shooting up cocaine. And I went on this binge of shooting up for 2.5 to 3 months. This is before Elton John, before it was the summer of 75. And I became a total, absolute drug addict. Not to say that I wasn't a drug addict before just snorting cocaine, but now I would have done anything. I would have stolen. In fact, I want to say I didn't steal, but at the same time, I think I probably did steal cocaine out of Bob's stash and all that stuff, So I would have really done anything to get that next shot of cocaine. Spent money, lied, um, hid it from everybody. It was a secret. Talk about being as sick as your secrets. And one night, and I lost a lot of weight. I was, people started noticing, um, how sick I looked. And I was still going to these meetings. And one night, I told Bob's brother, Dan, who would later become my husband, but it's all, like this. We were friends. And he was also supporting Bob by going to AA meetings. He would also get sober eventually. And one night after a meeting in Hollywood, I took Dan outside and I said, I got to tell you something because it was killing me. He knew something was wrong. Everybody knew something was going on that I wasn't talking about. Anyway, I told him what I was doing. And he said, you have to talk to this other person, Luann. Luann Sims she's passed now, but she was this incredible human being who was my Eskimo into the program. And she had befriended Bob and Dan. She had 13 years of sobriety at the time. Anyway, I finally did. And she told me step by step how to go to this person who I was only shooting up cocaine with this one person who had started me on it, or I had started with. It wasn't her fault. told me how to end that relationship and therefore end that. And I did. I did. I did exactly what Luann told me to do, and I stopped shooting up. I did not stop drinking. I did not stop snorting cocaine. I tried to stop drinking by myself for a month or so, and I tried to stop doing cocaine for a month or so. Okay, so that was the summer of 75. November 13th of 1975, after I went on the road for the first tour with Elton John. I'm sorry, that's not true. I went on the road with Elton John for the next year and a half. I got sober in 76, not 75. I met Elton in 75, September of 75, and a lot of good things happened. I stopped shooting up. I never did it again after that time, after that 2-month period in the summer of 75. But I did enough snorting and enough drinking. My drinking got worse. And guess what? Even though I thought I wasn't an alcoholic, in that year, 75 to 76, I became an alcoholic. I had to drink. And I did Valium to put myself to sleep after a night of cocaine and so on and so forth. And in November, and finally, I started screwing up because I was very professional. I was young, but I was very professional, and I really didn't want to screw up anything I did on a professional level. Now, mind you, I had no relationship. I had friends and stuff like that, but I didn't have a partner. I didn't have a relationship. I was about me and what I was going to do and what my career was going to be and so on and so forth. And I did not want to screw it up. And I started screwing up. Not so that you could see, not so the people in the audience could see, but I could. I knew that I was not stable. I knew I was, couldn't get up in the morning for a rehearsal, or I couldn't, go for a meeting with so and so. I couldn't, I had to turn on, in a hotel room, I had to turn on the do not disturb, don't even get me up for this, that, and the other thing. I showed up on stage and I showed up for whatever I needed to do, but all the extraneous stuff, which was also what I needed to do, I started screwing up. I'm going to skip. November 13th, 1976. Actually, November 12th, 1976. My friend Dan, who was Bob's brother, who became my husband, invited me to dinner, and he had gotten sober 28 days before. He had been visiting the rooms with Bob too. Bob got sober, and Dan got sober 28 days before this. He invited me to dinner. He knew I was in trouble. And I was at my dealer's house in the San Fernando Valley and remembered for some reason that I had a dinner date with now sober Dan. And for some reason, it became really important for me to keep that date. This is God working in my life. This is a higher power. And we'll get to God in a minute, and I want to get to that. I go to Dan's. He says, we're going to dinner. I'll drive. Now in Los Angeles, whoever drives has the power. I said, okay, but I'm not going to an AA meeting. Sorry, I'm not going to a recovery meeting. And he said, okay. And we go to dinner. And of course, he drives up to the Friday night Rodeo Drive meeting. And he said, if you don't want to go in, you can walk home. I lived a long way from there. I walked in, and in Los Angeles in the meetings, whoever is in their first 30 days raises their hand. I raised my hand. My friend Luann, who was sitting behind me, said, "It's about time, honey," and put her hand on my shoulder. I walked out of that meeting, and I don't recommend this to anybody who wants to get sober. I got in my car. I drove back to my dealer's house. And by that time, there were several people there who were regulars. And I said, "I'm getting sober." And they laughed. And I did a couple of hits of cocaine, and I went home. And I knew that was it for me. Now, it's 45 years later. And all I can tell you is that, honest to God, for those 16,540 days, the most important thing that I have done right or correctly in recovery is not pick up a drink or a drug. I have lived my whole adult life within the rooms of recovery. And some of it has not been pretty. Some of it has been unbelievably fantastic. I have lived life. Life is life, you know. And the older you get, and now I'm pretty old, you know, Asdru said he had 2 kids in their 20s. I have 4 grandchildren, you know. And life is life. Shit happens. Tragedy happens. And good stuff happens. Wonderful stuff. Stuff you cannot even believe. So all I've done to get to the point where I am today, which is alive and sober and clean, is not pick up a drink or a drug. Recovery, the 12 steps for me, were how I got to this point. And there have been some bumps in the road. But luckily, and by the grace of God, I should say, not luckily, by the grace of God or a power greater than myself. And I told you before, we're going to get to God in a minute. By the grace of a power greater than myself, when I got into these rooms in Los Angeles at 25 years old, the foundation was there. And I paid attention. For some reason, I was willing to do what you told me to do, what they told me to do. I was just a punk kid. I wanted to be a rock and roll star. You know, I was one of the youngest people in the room back in 1976. There were some, thank God, and I'm still friends with some of them today. You know, some of those people I got sober with who were young like me back then. But there weren't a lot of us. And I stayed sober. Let me say a quick thing. Asdru was talking, and I enjoyed listening to him a lot. And he was talking. You asked him a question about, did your music change before, after he, got sober? For me, my entire career, other than singing with Elton John, I have a solo career. Other than singing with Elton John, and I can't even remember I think Rod Stewart was before I got sober. Dylan was. My entire career has been in sobriety. Everything that's happened to me, all the stuff that's happened to me has happened in sobriety. I could jump around here. I did have a career. I had a successful career. I sang on the Grease movie soundtrack and was nominated for a Grammy for that. The next year I was nominated for a Grammy for my own album, for my own single of that album, And that single was called, ironically, Survivor, back in 1979. I'm not saying these things for any reason except to say this is what happened to me after I stopped drinking and using drugs. You know, really good things started happening, and really hard things started happening. Bouncing ahead, I decided, I'm a woman, don't forget, back then, I decided to get married and have kids. So I left the music business in in 1980, really. And I had 2 children. My daughter in 1982, Reed, and my daughter Jessie in 1985. I dabbled in some music. I did some stuff. I made an album in '89. Didn't go anywhere, but I did. I started writing songs in Nashville in the '90s, and had a relatively successful time in the early '90s as a songwriter in Nashville. I didn't live there. I live in Nashville now, ironically. I didn't live there then. I was in Maine, and because we moved from LA back to New York and New England in 1980, and my kids were born on the East Coast, and so in 1995, my daughter Jessie was diagnosed with cancer in December of '95, and in March of '96, she died. Now today happens to be her birthday, and she would have been 37 years old today. She was 11 when she died, 3 weeks after her 11th birthday. And I bring that up because, well, for several reasons. You know, losing a child is a tragedy that's of high magnitude. Some people say it's the worst thing that can happen to you. I know that it was the worst thing that happened to me and my family. Now, don't forget, I'm Jessie's mother. Not that her father hasn't suffered the same grief. But I bore my baby 37 years ago today, actually. And her death on March 23rd, 1996, crushed me. 2 things. I didn't pick up a drink or a drug, and I didn't want to. I wanted to die. I wanted to erase myself from the face of the earth. I had another daughter that I had to take care of and be there for. But it broke me at a level that I don't think I can really explain. I'm trying to. I'm writing my memoir right now. And it's tough. I'm right there in that part of the book. And I lost the faith that I had had. Even before I got sober, I had a faith in a power greater than myself. I didn't even know what it was. I didn't know what to call it. My family wasn't religious. I mean, we were WASPs from New England, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. I mean, so there's a loose Christianity floating around. But my parents didn't go to church. So I didn't have a foundation in the church. But over the 19 years between getting sober and my daughter's death, I had formed some kind of relationship, changing, of course, because it does change, but I had formed some kind of relationship with a power greater than myself. When Jessie died, it didn't go away right away, but it started disintegrating. And I'm still I'm still struggling. Now it's been 26 years. And I'm being absolutely honest. Still struggling with getting a real sense of faith and trust in a power greater than myself. You hear people in the rooms and in recovery talking about when they hit their bottom, in their drunkalogue, and for me, I feel like I hit my bottom when Jesse died. And things started unraveling for me. I stopped doing some of the things that I should have done in the program. I couldn't hear. I'd go to a meeting and I'd hear somebody talking about this, that, and the other thing, and it was like, "Are you kidding me?" I won't go into a lot of that, but the point is this: I can get through anything I know without a drink or a drug. And my life since, and I don't want to leave you with the impression that my life since Jesse's death has been this Greek tragedy. It some of it has, and it was a tragedy, and it is a tragedy that my daughter is not 37 years old, and that her sister grew up without a sister, and all the ripple effects. But the gifts that have been given to me in my life, they don't outweigh Jesse's death, but they are as real and as palpable as the loss, if I allow them to be. It's all me. It's all me. It's all me. Am I willing today to be grateful for what I have? I still make gratitude lists. I pull them up. When I'm in my right mind, I write a gratitude list. And let me tell you, it can be long. Sometimes it's not as long as it should be, but it could be. But I have to, because I couldn't breathe, is the way I put it, for like 5 years after Jesse's death. I could barely breathe. I did a lot of things in that 5 years. I went to be of service. I was of service for 15 years after Jesse's death with bereaved parents and seminars on death and dying at colleges and universities and all kinds of things all around the world. I spoke and I played my music and I made music about it, which became kind of a worldwide phenomenon. I did a lot of good in my daughter's name for other people. I showed up. So I didn't pull the covers over my head. I did put one foot in front of the other, and I did do what I could do. But I lost a sense over time, even with all that good that was created for me. I didn't, by the way, I did not initiate a lot of these things. I really feel like, talk about a higher power, that I was just fed some of this stuff. Go do this, go do that, go do this, go do that. Get yourself out there. I didn't sit around and go, "Oh, I think I'll make an album about my daughter's death and have it go around the world." I didn't ask for any of it. But my mind, my alcoholic mind, my lack of self-worth, my whatever you want to call it, even today, is so strong that I have to plug in to all the precepts and all the steps and all the tools that I can so that I can continue to show up, which I've heard a lot of Casey's guests talk about. Showing up. It makes me want to cry, because the one thing I do want to do in this world is I want to show up. There are days when I went through the biggest depression I've ever been through, and I am unfortunately a depressive person. I suffer from that disease. Even before Jesse's death, I've suffered from depression. It's terrible. It's a terrible thing. And of course, back when my early years, there was no, we didn't do much about it. Today, there's more things they can do about it, and for which I'm grateful. But last year, the pandemic year, and that's a whole nother story we won't go into, but, as with so many of us, my ground kind of shook beneath me. And the isolation. Thank God for Zoom. Thank God for Zoom. And the little boxes. Thank God for the little boxes, Casey. Thank you. But I went through a depression last year, and it was another bottom for me. And I had to come to the decision and say, hey, am I going to live in this world the way it is today? And it really kind of sucks today in a lot of ways, the outside world. Or am I going to live? Now, we didn't even talk about my transition. 10 years ago, I had not an epiphany, but a friend of mine called me up who I hadn't seen in 2 years, who I sponsored in the 12-step program. As a woman, as a woman, he moved away, called me up, and he said, I had no idea. He had transitioned from female to male and was living his life as a man. And I blew my mind, because that had been my, not secret, but my inner core feeling for my entire life. And people knew about it. My closest people knew about it. My husband, not at the time, we had divorced after Jesse's death, but people who were close to me knew how I felt. And when my friend Dallas called me and told me that, there was no going back. I thought, oh my God, this is possible? I was old. I was 60 years old. But I didn't have a partner. I was living by myself. My daughter was grown, already had a child. She was on her own. I had no responsibility to anybody else. And I went, what the heck? And it wasn't quite that easy, but don't try this at home, by the way. really serious, because it's changing genders is not for the faint of heart. Let's just put it that way. Especially at my age, and with a career, and with blah, 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 ... Had it not been for Jesse's death and my having to find my way after that, had it not been for my sobriety, first of all, I could not have even attempted to become who I felt I was. Has it been perfect? Definitely not. Definitely not perfect. Definitely has consequences. Has it been challenging? Absolutely. Really challenging. Has it been rewarding? Yes. Yes, it has. I get to sit here before you and say, my name is Sid. not Cindy, which I hated, by the way. And I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict. And I'm alive, and I'm living my life as the true person who I think I am. I'm married to a wonderful woman who I met after I transitioned, which is a miracle. I mean, I first of all, I didn't want to get married, so I thought that was out of the question. That's a whole nother story. And is life a challenge today? Absolutely. It's a challenge for us all. We're all challenged today. I mean, just the mere fact that, we've had 2 years of pandemic, not to mention what's going on in the outside world, with all the stuff that's going on today, this day as we sit here, and all the division and all the this, that, and the other thing, We in recovery it's all about honesty. It's all about authenticity. I'm on the I'm on the other end of life now. I've got to well, we all have finite times. I know that, believe me. After losing a child at 11. But I know that because I have not picked up a drink or a drug, and I've done a few simple things within the concept of a 12-step recovery program. And I've been willing to be at least somewhat honest with myself over the years, that I get to be my authentic self. And if that day my authentic self is pissed off and, not grateful, and why is this happening to me, and why can't I do that, and all that crap that I still have going on, okay. And then I have a tool, which sometimes I have to look at. I mean, if you saw my desk, you'd see sticky notes all over it. And by the way, let me just say something. I loved what Astru said about the God-sized hole. I wrote it down. Fear is just a God-sized hole. That's what fear is. And I'm going to carry that with me. I've got it on a sticky note, so it's going to go somewhere. I have the grace of being here in front of you today, right now. Because at 25 years old, I said, okay, I don't want to die. I have a whole life ahead of me. I'm not on the way down. I'm on the way up, meaning in life. I don't want to die. And for that amount of time, here I am. And like I said, it hasn't been perfect, but I'm sitting here in front of you. And I want to thank Casey and Horry-Georgetown, all you guys. Thank you for being here. Christina, I want to thank you for asking me to share.
Thank you, Sid. Well done. We've got time for a couple of questions. So did your mother ever get into recovery? How did that work out later on?
Nope. My mother never got into recovery. Neither did my father. They both died in their 80s. It's a long story. But my mother, my dad had Alzheimer's, so that I think pulled them back a little bit from their partying days. And my mother got ill too with some heart stuff, so she had to stop doing some of the things she was doing. So it was more of a physical reason that she didn't drink as much as she used to. She never got sober.
Do you think you were close to death when you hit your bottom with the cocaine and the needle?
I do. Not that I was going to die in my sleep of malnutrition or something, although I was like this big around. But I really think, honestly believe, because I had never done heroin. That was the one thing that I really was afraid of. You're shooting up cocaine, you're putting it in your, arm, and you're laying on the bathroom floor trying to get your heart started, and you're afraid of heroin. Yeah, but I was, and I had a friend who had some and was doing both. And I can remember the day before I got sober. Now, I didn't know I was going to get sober the next day. I was thinking about calling my friend, and because I had stopped, don't forget, shooting up. But I was thinking about doing it again. And this time I was thinking about doing heroin. So I think I would have died.
Can you tell us a little bit about the documentary that's out there about your life?
Yeah, I've been fortunate. There's a documentary. Well, very quickly, I wrote a one-person show called Somewhere Between Not an Ordinary Life. In 2014 and 15, and performed it around the country in 2016 through 18, about my life. And it was about work, from the time I arrived in Los Angeles to the present, and everything in between. It was multimedia and had pictures and whatever. And there's a line in my show where my daughter Reed, who Jesse's sister, my daughter Reed, the mother of my 4 grandchildren, when I told her that I was thinking about transitioning, she said, "Mom, here's the gender line. You've always been on just this side, the female side of the gender line. Now you're moving over to this side, the other side of the gender line." My daughter, by the way, also said, "It's not like anybody's going to know the difference, Mom." So what about transition? Because I have the same clothes and, all that stuff. But anyway, so the gender line was a line in my show. And I was the director of another documentary called Invisible, which is now out. It was delayed because of the pandemic. Now playing in film festivals. It was a full-length documentary about women songwriters in the South. And at that time, I was a woman songwriter in the South for a while. Anyway, he wanted to put me in the film after seeing my show into the full-length documentary. So he came to Maine, shot me in Maine. I was living in Maine in 2018. And in September of 18 for the full-length feature. And in May of 2019, he called me up and he said, "I'm putting out a documentary short." He said, "I took what we filmed of you, and it was so compelling that we're taking it out of still in the full-length film, but they took it out of the full-length film, Invisible, expanded it, and made it into a documentary short called The Gender Line." And that went on to play in over 25 film festivals, won a whole bunch of awards from 2019 through 2020. And actually, it might have even played in something in 2021. So that is a documentary short called The Gender Line about my life. And the director, TJ Parcell, is brilliant because he put my life into 13 minutes, and he did it brilliantly. And so you can find it. It's not on YouTube, but it is embedded in a Washington Post article. If you Google my name with Washington Post, it's embedded in that article. It was a front page Washington Post article that came out in 2020. And I'm writing my memoir, let me say. I got a book deal, and I'm writing my memoir now. And I did make an album called Walking Through This World, which came out as you mentioned, in the middle of the pandemic, and there is a song on there called "The Gender Line," which was inspired by the movie, which was inspired by my show. So it's all a circuitous route.
That's great. That's all we have time for. Sid, thank you so much for showing up and sharing your experiences with us. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Tune in next year. Hopefully, we'll be in person, and follow the series on Facebook and on YouTube. Thanks, and have a great night. Good night, Sid.
Good night. Thank you.